uh, review for this book, 1 Billion Americans. I'll give this book 2 stars out of 5. I didn't really think this it's an idea he had about having 1 billion Americans. I think this idea should be more in an article. It's not enough, I would say. If he opened it up, it's not enough to have it in a book, even because some or most of his ideas were not fully baked, I would say. There was a lot of loose ends in the book. So I would definitely think an article would be just a better way to convey the message, because if you're going into deep into how you would have so many Americans, this is not enough. Again, many of his ideas were not fully done or half baked, I would call it. And generally, just his writing style is not very clear. It was not very clear what he wants and how he solves up some of the problems. He's kind of jumping from one thing to another. So I would not personally. I wasn't appreciative of this writing style. And finally, I don't think his argument was very convincing. I do think that having more Americans is a good thing, but he failed with providing evidence or some support to how this thing would exactly happen. He has some arguments, but I felt most of them failed. So let's see the notes. The US is bound to lose its first place in GDP due to small number of people. So this is where he says, like, we are going to lose our place as in the US, but because there is more other countries like China and India, they have more people, and that's where usually GDP grows. So we're gonna lose it. Less people are having babies these days. That's another problem, that there is less and less babies, so it's even harder to grow. Density in the US is the lowest among developed countries. There is much more place to people to live, so that's one of his arguments of why we should have. So on this part, why we should have more Americans, that's where he had a good point. But all the counter arguments of the problems of having so many Americans, this is where he miserably failed, in my opinion. Side note, there are many unrelated and unfinished thoughts. That's really what bothered me in this book, is that many of his ideas were not very clear. He kind of saying one sentence, and in his view, he solved the problem, but this is much more complicated than that. This is why I'm saying that it's either an article or a 20-30 hour worth of listening, a much longer book, because it's much more problematic than what he's trying to convey. Some jobs would simply disappear when lack of employees would present itself. So there is less and less. That's why we need more people to work. When there is no work, no one to work in those jobs, some jobs would just simply disappear. Final one. The people who go to community and housing meetings are not representing the population. That's one of the problems, that it's harder to create more housing because the people who do go there, they call them NIMBYs. I think NIMBYs, it's not in my backyard. And those people who go to those meetings and prevent new housing are usually not representative of the community. Again, that's it for the notes. Again, I'll give this book 2 out of 5. One would think it was a good case. I wouldn't recommend necessarily reading it. The way I heard about this book is from a podcast. I do think he had some good point over the podcast, and I do think he has some good points in the book. But as a book, just by itself, I would not recommend. Thank you.